This video is sponsored by Game Toppers. Turn your own kitchen or dining room table into a premium portable game solution at a fraction of the cost. Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 781. Today we're going to take a look at Great Western Trail New Zealand, which is the third in the trilogy, I believe the final game in the trilogy of Great Western Trail Argentina, and now finally New Zealand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the table. I'm not going to do like a whole big old walkthrough. I'll just kind of talk about some of the differences between this edition and some of the previous ones. And what I'll also do in the review, kind of in keeping with sort of the style that I do, but I'll also kind of give you like my top ways or favorite ways to play Great Western Trail. So I'll order them in kind of my favorite, variant of what all the system is bringing us. So let's go to the table, talk about some of the differences and stuff like that, and I'll kind of come back and give you my general thoughts. Okay, I've got things kind of splayed out here all over the table, as you might see it during gameplay. A couple things to note: you can see the main board, you got the different trails and stuff that you're going up to make your deliveries, and your delivery track there, just like the kind of every game so far. In this particular game, instead of trains, you have these little ships that you're going to drive around to give you little extra places to make deliveries. So you have the normal kind of deliveries at the top, but then you can also make deliveries here. But in this game, since we're dealing with sheep instead of cows, we can shear them and then make like effective deliveries to certain spots over here on this board, which I'll show you. So that's a little bit different. And then over here, I'll zoom in a little bit closer here. You can see we have kind of two separated areas here. One is strictly for workers, and workers kind of have a more, stable cost in a way. It's very much a supply and demand. So as you get more workers that get drawn out of these bags over here, the more of them that are drawn out, the cheaper they are. As they get bought up, they get more expensive. So they're not really dictated by this somewhat, it's not really random, but kind of random setup over here. Now what you've got down here, we can see the cost kind of scales up and down based on, kind of how far along in the game we are. We have these different bonus tiles that you can pay for with money, and there's different actions to buy those. And this is what drives that end game trigger, which will knock off that little 5-point bonus marker, similar to the other two games in this series. So the workers aren't involved in that process. It's just these different bonus tiles. Although I should say, you do have here this concept of a wild worker. You can see that blonde-haired looking person there, and you can see those are wild workers. So if you buy one of those, as an example, you can put it down here. Here we have this shearer here, and then you can also buy one of these as a wild worker and put it wherever you want there, and it acts just like a normal worker. You can put it out to get a bonus tile and all that kind of stuff. Now, a couple of differences here we can see, a couple of things to keep in mind. You have kind of your general idea here where you're making deliveries, getting rid of discs and stuff like that, unlocking some of the extra abilities and the double actions and better movement and more cards drawn. And you have your certificates here, which you can see. That's all just like the other games. Here you have like this gold nugget track here. You always start with one of these. And then as you collect nuggets, you can see these different symbols here. There's certain extra cards outside of, the sheep cards or the cow cards in the other game and the end game bonus cards. There's these other kind of called deck building cards that you can spend, and you'll shuffle up some random ones from the game, and there's there's like 12 or so different, maybe it's 10 different types, and you'll shuffle up 4 of them and then put those out for purchase, and they're purchased here by gold, and then as you spend them, that'll go down here like so. And then the other thing you can do here is, if you want, you can, instead of spending these exchange tokens to kind of shuffle through your deck, you can spend 2 of them to get rid of the cheapy Shropshire sheep, who nobody wants to draw that one. You can get rid of one of those, trash that from your deck, and then also gain a gold. And gaining and spending the gold here is kind of like a free action. It's not really tied to any part of the game. And then down here you have these little houses here, which will unlock different bonuses. Now these houses will go over on that little C board, which I'll show you in a minute. And as you unlock these, you'll get different bonuses, either endgame points or extra gold or certificates or shearing bonuses or little tokens and stuff. And so that's a new little thing that you can get those to go out. Now, speaking of shearing, we mentioned that a few times. We'll take a look at some of the sheep up here, and this is kind of the market where you can get at these just like you could the cows in the other games. And it's the same idea here. You've got here kind of the value that they are when they kind of go to market, and the shearing value. And you can see sometimes those are different. So this Lincoln sheep here is a little bit better for shearing, a little bit more woolly. than it is to deliver to the market at the end of your trail there. So when you take a shearing action, you're going to do it based on the number of shearing workers, which I just showed you down there. So in this case, we've got 3. So I can then at that point discard 3 different sheep. And it's the same kind of set collection, idea that you're building for the main delivery, but you can also do this. There's a special building on the board that could be at the beginning of the trail, the middle, or the beginning, or the end. And then you'll discard those. So if I had 2 shearer workers, I could discard those and I would get $7 because you just add up the shearing value. And then you can, if you want, you're not forced to in this case like you are with the main delivery to put out a disc, but if you want to, you can put out a disc in one of the other locations that accept like a delivery of wool, let's say. And here at the top of the board, these are kind of built in by default. Everybody has access to that. So you can see 13, 9, and 5. So if I do a delivery there, I could put a disc out. There's a cost. You get some extra points. This bottom one here, this 13, you can put as many discs on there as you want. It's a little bit difficult to get to a higher number of shearing as it is, for delivery, because you need to actually have the shearing workers to even really participate in that at all. But keeping with the theme of this board here, as you move your ships out, you can put these little houses out. See, I've got my little yellow houses out there, and that gives me access to those little locations. Now you can see this one here, if I can zoom in, that 5 there, that's a normal delivery location, but I've got these 2 up in the corner, the 7 and the 11. Oh, the 7 is actually a normal one, but you see the 11's got the little white background, right? So that's a shearing lock. Now I can have access to place a disc when I do a shearing action there on that location if I've got a house there. Now there's other spots on the board here that just accept a house. You can see this one's got a cost of $3. And when I do that, I'll put a little house there and I'll unlock a little spot on my board. And then it'll give me 4 points at the end of the game. And then you can see the bell there, which allows me again to do one of those deck building card purchases, which I'll show you in a second. Now the way that the boat movement works, there'll be different actions that will allow you to move your boat based on the number of the different types of workers that you have, or spending money and that kind of things to move them, similar to the trains in the other game. And so you move them around to these different spots, but once you get to a spot that has like a little dock, a little port there, you'll spend 1 extra movement, and then at that point, at the cost of that extra movement, then you can go ahead and put out one of those little houses there. And then that cancels the movement for that particular action. Now sometimes the little spaces will give you 2 movements, or 2 groupings of movements, so you can try to kind of manipulate that in a certain way. So you can like move a little bit and then put your thing in. Then if you get another movement action on the same turn, then you can take that and kind of trounce around there. You can see there's some like dead ends and stuff like that. So there's certain sort of planning and strategy that you have to go into to do these different routes. Whether you're going to be shearing, you probably want to go up this way, maybe try to do some really big deliveries and you'll kind of come down this way, or get out over here and you just, want to get a lot of houses out and purchase some of the more expensive deck building cards that's kind of out here. So investing in that kind of movement early will give you some options there as well. Now before we talk about the deck building cards, let's talk about this bird track. I should call it by its real name, the Pathfinder track. And so everybody will choose one of their actions here to start with and pull a disc off. So you have kind of unlocked maybe a double action or some other action that you have access to at the beginning of the game, and you'll put your disc there at the bottom. And then as you get different symbols through card play or buildings, you'll start to move up this track here. So you can see you get gold and stuff like that, and then you'll get more and more points the higher you get. And the other thing you're going to do is kind of unlock extra movement. So let's go down here. So you can see, just like the other game, if you pull one of these discs off, you get extra movement there. But the first time that you go past, and it depends on player count, a certain part of the Pathfinder track you add a +1, and then you have a choice actually. You can actually add a +2 there, or instead of adding the +2, you can instead flip this tile here. So you can see, normally, remember, if you hit the different obstacles and other player buildings that have these little hands, you've got to pay a cost either to the bank or to the other players. Now if you go up that Pathfinder track far enough, instead of taking the +2, I can instead leave it at +1 and flip that over, and now I don't have to pay anything when I go through those tracks. So that you could, you could kind of gauge that based on how many buildings people are dropping down, because there's not always a big building frenzy, depending on how people are what they're doing. Okay, so now let's talk about probably the biggest change in a way to the game from the other systems is the deck building side. Now again, before we slide all the way over there, you also remember the bonus tiles I talked about. Some of these will have you engaging with purchasing some of these extra deck building cards. And then you'll have different things that will allow you to pull off some of the obstacle features out here. There's two types of obstacle features. You can see there's the mountain one and there's river ones up there. And when you remove those, you get those tiles for the points, but then you'll also at the same time be able to grab some of the standard deck building cards that are out here. So these three are always in play there. And then you've also got this one here, the Romney sheep, who will also be given to you when you make some of the shearing. So if you do a lot of shearing, you're probably going to be collecting a lot of those Romney sheep. I think that's the only way to get them most of the time. And so you can see those are worth a good amount of points. They're a low cost, well, they're a no cost sheep, but they give you a lot of points, and you know, they can kind of help with your diversity. So here you've got this display of all these deck building cards. And they have these little tokens here like this, so you can kind of group them based on the different things. So they have different like purchasing power based on the gold track that I showed you. So these four over here might be kind of shuffled up in different ways. These are always in play. Most of these have this little symbol here. So when you get these in your hand, you can play them immediately, and then you do the effect at the bottom, but these means you get to immediately draw a card right after the top of that. So you could use, you know, build up your hand with the sheep to score for points or trade them for money and that kind of thing. So for example, I play this one, I get $2. This is worth 0 points. Then I can go draw another card off my deck. This one here will give me another certificate temporarily. And they have the bonus cards here. This is the same kind of idea here. Again, you play these and then they stay out. You don't get to immediately draw a card. You'll draw more at the end of the turn. And they, you know, you're kind of committing to having this kind of end game situation for bonus points or losing points if you can't get there. And then I talked about the Romney cards. Now these over here, these four, these will all be different. And so some of them might be bonus cards. Like you can see, this is just a different bonus card. And one thing to keep in mind, these are all 3 points, positive or negative. Any bonus cards out here are 4 points, positive or negative. And then you also have some of these other cards here, like this one, for example. These are all worth a point at the end of the game, so it's good to just buy them anyway. And if you play this, you will get 1 point for each of the bonus cards you've already played, and you get to draw a card. This one here is a nice, you know, different kind of sheep here. And this one, for example, allows you to either collect a coin, or what this means is basically any cards that I acquire this turn go immediately on top of my deck instead of discard pile. And so there's a lot of interesting ones like this that allow you to kind of do little cool activities like upgrade your player built buildings or put out those little houses on the seaboard and that kind of stuff. So this whole little thing here is kind of like the most different part of it. But that's pretty much all the differences. Let's go back to my talking head. Okay, so that was a very brief overview of some of the differences between New Zealand and the other two Great Western Trails. So let's just jump into my review. Like I promised at the beginning, I'm just going to quickly jump into kind of my favorite ways to play. Player count wise, same. I think the play time's the same, about 1.5 hours, 2 hours or so, a little over 2 hours, probably depending on player count. So it's going to fit right into the same thing. So if you like Great Western Trail, you're probably going to like this. It's not really deviating in any crazy way, shape, or form. So let's just cut right to the meat of the chase for my final pillar of review, which is what is this game like, which will lead me to talk about which is my favorite. And I'm going to kind of work my way up to my favorite way to play. Now, my least favorite way to play Great Western Trail is the original game with the expansion. I think to a person, my entire group does not like the expansion. It just does too much, like completely different. It's just such a drastic, like complete paradigm shift in terms of like how you play the game. So that would be like, I'll call it my number 4. So if we're doing my top 4, number 4 is the first game with the expansion. Now, I think what they did with some of these later games is they've kind of corrected what they were trying to do with that first expansion. I mean, I don't know. This is all my opinion, right? So that's what it feels like to me. So my third favorite way to play Great Western Trail is the original game by itself. So I really like that game. It was been in my top 50 or whatever. So I've really enjoyed it. But I feel like the next 2 games on the list really have improved upon it and kind of like highlighted things that I was like, oh, I didn't really know, this was an issue, but I feel like, oh, they given you these extra little tools and stuff like that to kind of work around some of the ways and made it more thematic and more, integrated in terms of how everything works together, and it really hums, and it doesn't really disparage, in my opinion, the first game. But if you pin me down, and when I get to the end of the list, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. But I would say you don't really need the first game anymore. Although, it's the most simple way to play the game for sure. The base game, just the original Great Western Trail. I'd say you could skip the expansion altogether. But if you wanted to kind of baby step it into it, I think that's a great idea. And I think after a while, you probably will let that one slide off to the end. But there's definitely a little bit less going on in that one, so I can kind of see why. If you jumped into one of these other two, I don't know, it might just be too much. It's like, what's all this stuff happening? Although we'll talk about more of that in a minute. So that's my number 3. Now, number 2 is New Zealand. It's not my favorite. My favorite's Argentina. And I kind of explain why, because right now I'm just going to talk about both New Zealand and Argentina, because to me that's kind of the top ways. But I will start out by saying I think there's more of a reason, at least for me, and I don't know, I would kind of expect others to feel the same, but you never know, that there's more of a reason to keep New Zealand and Argentina in the same collection. It feels really redundant to keep all 3 at a certain point, but like I said, you might baby step your way into it. Because again, especially with New Zealand, I think New Zealand's the most complicated of them. It has the most going on. And if you just jumped right into New Zealand, you might be like, what's all this crap? All of these levers I'm pulling, what is all? It's like so much mechanics, so many different little, resources that you're tracking, all these different things you have to keep track of. So it might be a tough first outing for your first Great Western Trail game. And that's going to depend on the person and how much they like a game for mechanics and stuff like that. And that's kind of where this one sort of slightly, I don't want to say misses the mark, but it doesn't achieve to me what Argentina does. Now, Argentina adds a couple extra mechanics, and it kind of seamlessly does it. Because you've got the whole, I can't pronounce the name, the extra worker that you get in Argentina that you can kind of boost the grain deliveries with, and they can kind of help you out along the way. So instead of running into obstacles, you're picking up helpers. And so that's kind of a nice twist. And then it makes the delivery part of it really cool and interesting, which I thought at the time when I first played Argentina, I was like, okay, this is like a fixed version of the first game's expansion, where you really had some, say in terms of what you're delivering and kind of what everything's about. Because the most interesting part about all 3 of these games is you have this movement game, because it's all movement about how fast you move and the pace that you're kind of cycling the board, and you really feels like you're traveling back and forth on this trail, and you're touching base with all these businesses and these different buildings and stuff that you're establishing in this whatever region the game is set in. And then you're making these ultimate deliverables, these payloads that you're trying to get out into the market. So all of the actions are kind of in service to that. And it feels like you don't have your hand in just one industry. It feels like a more holistic view of the larger economy in some kind of a very abstract way about okay, I've got buildings and establishments that I'm putting in place, and that's going to help me or maybe hinder other players. And things cause a tax or a rent on them in a kind of very abstract way. And you've got your main sort of product that you're delivering, but also on the back end of that, in terms of what are my different markets that I'm delivering to? What are the kind of the different expectations of not just an abstract my deliveries are getting bigger every turn, which is what the first game kind of just does. This one has some working out. It feels like you're kind of making deals and stuff like that, and setting up contracts. And so that is what really sort of pushed Argentina above, and this has that same kind of thing where instead of the train deliveries and kind of the overseas grain shipments type of things where you kind of have to build up the grain to help feed the cows and stuff because they're going far away. This has that with the kind of combination of the shearing, because you got the dual use of the sheep, and then also the little C-track thing and getting those kind of things out there. And so both of those games really kind of they're right there with each other, and you can kind of pick or choose how you want to do that. And so this has all of that same stuff as Argentina, but then it kind of adds a little bit more to it. And so with the shearing, it's kind of akin to getting those helper workers in a way, because you're trying to get it's a little different though, because you're like shearing and getting money and making these other deliveries. Whereas in Argentina, it's like you've got the extra grain sort of on the side. But to me, it's more integrated and more balanced across all the different sort of strategies in Argentina. Whereas this, because you're like so dependent, for like go heavy shearing, which is viable for sure. But it's also like, if sometimes the workers don't come out and you've got to like change your strategy and stuff like that. And that's kind of part of the game anyway. But it seems like a little bit like anchored on that side, which is not a problem. But then it goes and introduces this whole deck building card concept with the gold track, and you've got that bird track, the Pathfinder track, so you got to like maintain that a little bit. So it's this extra place to dump your money. And then you have these deck building cards. And so my one caveat with that is I've played games of this where the deck building cards have been really cool and it like feels so different. And I was like, oh, this is the best one. This is out of the three because it's just got this extra layer and dimension. And you can change this, but then you got deck building cards. I'm like, oh, that's another bonus card, or it's just another sheep. Like, I don't even care about that. And it's like, you can opportunity buy certain things. Like, okay, I got some coin, I'll put it in there. It's worth a point anyway, and I can kind of get that. But it's not interesting. It's just boring. But some of the other deck building ones, the ones that like upgrade your buildings, buy cards on your draw pile, or other ones that'll put out like your little houses in the thing. You can put them out like 3 spaces away. Those kind of combo-y types of things, those are really fun, and that makes it pretty interesting. But then it's just like, and then they kind of like pile more on it. So now you have these bonus tiles that you can buy, which are separate from the worker market. And it's like, I don't know. It's very strange because sometimes it's almost like you have a dearth of workers in general. Because if you have games where the wild worker comes out, then it's pretty okay. Because you're like, they bought up a bunch, so I can pay a little bit extra and get the wild worker and then use that where I want it. But if those don't like come out, and you kind of generally have a game where workers don't come out as much, it's like more of the obstacles, then it's like pretty tight. So it's cool because it's different. But it's also like, this isn't what, I was kind of trying to hope to try the strategy this game. Like, well, that's not going to happen. And then if you don't have like cool deck building cards, it's just like, I don't know, it's just all these moving parts. And so it's all this negativity that I'm saying, but like I said, I'm going to keep both of these, the New Zealand one and the Argentina. If you pin me down, you said, what's the best one? Argentina, easy. Like, it's easy call. But this one is cool because it's like, I don't know, let me change it up, see what happens. Because you just have like this such a random injection of stuff at setup with the deck building cards, and it's not really during setup, but you kind of like know you're not going to be able to predict the worker situation and that kind of stuff, how that's going to come out. And there's already enough kind of random variables with the different, bonus tiles you can get at the shipping, and how the different sheep cards come out, and the, shuffling up the buildings and seeing what kind of actions are available. So there's already like a good, I think a right amount of randomness here. But this is just like piling on top of stuff. And so it's strange to compare these games, because when you go to like review a game, and it's like, this game, it exists, I know what other games it's kind of like, so I can kind of compare it. But this is being sold as like, here's a set, you know what I mean? And it's hard to like pick this apart, because I would say if this one existed all by itself and the others never existed, which is not the world we live in, so you can't really make a comparison like that. I don't really know like how that would work. Like how would I feel about it? How would people feel about it? Because they would probably just be like, this is a mess. And and maybe they would, it's hard to know that, but I feel like, I have a gut feeling, I'd say that this would be a mess. People would be like, this game's cool and there's a lot of stuff going on, but it's a mess. But because we have the other Great Western Trails sort of in the lexicon, in the knowledge, that you have of it, then it's like, okay, this is Great Western Trail for Great Western Trail fanatics, right? And I am one of those. I love Great Western Trail. I love the first game. I think it was in my top 20 games, and then Argentina kind of replaced it. Now that's in my top 20. And so this is just like a crazy, wacky variant for when I don't really want to play Argentina, I don't know. It's just more of the same, but with just all kinds of just stuff thrown into the kitchen sink. And I would say, unless you really, really, really like the other two Great Western Trails, I would not start with this one. But I would try one of the other two. And then if you're like, okay, I played that, 20 times or whatever it is, then I would say, okay, now you take this step up. And, and I think you're going to have games of it that are like really fun and satisfying. And like I said, I was kind of debating. I was like, I think this is the best one because it just has all this stuff. But then you have other times where it's like, I don't think this thing knows what it wants to do. It's like, it's so many different things. I'm like, okay, why do I have to spend nuggets on this? Why can't I just spend money to buy these cards? Because then and why can't we have more cards? Why can't we have more like funky cards that are like game breaking? You know what I mean? And maybe that's part of my problem is like, when I play a card game, I'm like, oh, I want the card that is just like the master card. Everybody wants that card. And I want every card to feel like that. But maybe that's not possible. And I can also see, I know I said, why don't you just buy those with money? But it's like you got enough other stuff to spend money on in the game because you got to build buildings, buy workers, buy the bonus tiles, spend money to get rid of the obstacle tiles, put money to get your discs out. So you're already spending money. You can't just have more stuff to spend money on because then nobody would ever buy those because you wouldn't have any money. And then you'd have to inject a whole bunch of money in the game, and then that would break something because then everybody would have too much money for the other things. So that's the whole thing. It wouldn't work. So you need an extra resource there. So it kind of makes sense. But it's just like, man, I wish, yeah. It's something like a little module. So I wonder if you could play this without the gold track and the extra cards. And it would probably be fine. I mean, let's see. I don't think I've ever played a game where I did not buy any of those cards, but I played games where I bought more of those, like a lot of them. And then in the games where I bought like almost none. So again, and the feel of it is just going to be very elusive. So that's why it's a little bit of caution coming out of here. So anyway, that's kind of my general sort of vibe. Argentina is the most solid, like I think just top to bottom, that game just all sort of flows and makes sense, and you can still play it different ways. But there's not a whole lot of like just, what? Oh, I forgot about this system over here, It's just not overload. And then this one is kind of like, if you like Great Western Trail and I've played it to death, I can emphasize that, I think that's important, then this is what you get to kind of just go, let's go to outer space with it. Right, and then I've already talked about, the base game. So that's where this sits. I think, for now, this is one's going to stay in the collection. But if you pinned me down and said, oh, Joe, I want to try one of these Great Western Trail games, get Argentina, and then you'll be fine. No big deal. Okay, so that's Great Western Trail New Zealand. Really enjoy it, but I'm comparing it to something I think is transcendent in Argentina. So tough act to follow there, guy. Okay, thanks.